Hi everyone, this is Shannon Williams from Rancher Labs. Thank you so much for joining us today for our meetup on supercharging your CI and CD pipeline with GitLab and Rancher. Looks like we have a great audience, and I expect this will be a really fun meetup. We're going to go through a lot of content, explain quite a bit about both GitLab, Rancher, containers, and more. We've got a great panel of speakers who are joining us today. And let me start by just introducing myself and my co-founder Darren, who hosts this meetup. I'm Shannon. I'm one of the heads of Rancher. I run our field stuff and have been here from the very beginning. Darren is our chief architect. You can follow us both on Twitter. We run this meetup every month and try to come up with fun, interesting topics to show you about containers, Kubernetes, Docker, Rancher, CI, DevOps, all sorts of topics. So thanks a lot. If you haven't already, please register to stay informed on these, because we run them, we record everyone, and we put them all on YouTube. If you haven't seen those in the past, you can take a look at them there. We also have some guest speakers. Adrian Goins is one of our senior field engineers here at Rancher. He's a big GitLab fan and user. He's going to be talking a lot today about how to combine Rancher with GitLab to build a full CD pipeline. So, Adrian, do you want to say hello?
Hey, everybody.
Adrian is joining us from Chile. He actually lives in Chile, so he'll be hopefully his network connection is spot on, and we'll have no network issues. I think you said you're on a fiber line, so I'm pretty confident that'll work well.
Yeah, we're hoping.
And Mark Punsack is also joining us today. Mark is the head of product at GitLab. He's going to talk a little bit about GitLab, give us a demo, talk about the company, the product direction. Mark, where are you dialing in from today?
I'm in the Chicago area today.
Chicago, awesome, excellent. And then finally, we have a guest presenter from Germany. Nick Thomas is the engineering manager at Klocknerei, which is a large steel distributor in Berlin. He's based in Berlin. Nick, do you want to say hello?
Hello from Berlin.
Nick is a user of both Rancher and GitLab, and is going to walk through very specifically how they at their team have combined all this stuff together in the real world to deliver a fully integrated pipeline. So, as always, we I want to just kind of set a little bit of the ground rules for how we run these. This really is a meetup as opposed to a webinar, meaning we're going to have a lot of talkers, but you guys are a big part of the discussion. So please ask questions as we go. I'll be taking your questions as they come in, asking them of the panelists, sharing them with each other. If you have thoughts or ideas, feel free to post them. Very often, if you ask a question and I can type out a quick response, I'll share it with the community. So as your questions come in, unless you really want it to be private, very likely I'll share the question back to the audience so they can sort of see what you're asking as we ask it. So we try to make it very open, and there's a few other things that are very typical for a meetup, I would say. We really don't set a time limit on these events. We try to start on time and get through as much as we can as quickly as we can. But given that this isn't an hour-long session, and will almost certainly go for more than an hour, we demo everything live. Questions are always welcome, and we don't leave until all your questions are answered. So fire away with questions as they come in. Because we demo everything live, there are no recordings and such. Sometimes things break. If we are trying to deploy something and we get a config wrong, be patient. We'll try to fix it. Sometimes we'll have a staged version somewhere that we can sort of pull to if we're really having issues. But by and large, it's all live. So it may be a little bit slower than sort of a video, but it's really nice for people to see how we actually do all of these things. The other thing is we have this great team of people chatting about what's going on typically on Twitter under the hashtag Rancher Meetup topic. So if you're coming for the first time, post your picture, say hello to everyone. We love to see who's actually on the call, and many of the people you see here have in the past presented or participated in different ways, come up with ideas for topics they'd love us to talk about. So if you get a minute, post there, just hashtag it with Rancher Meetup, and we'll We'll be able to track them, respond if you have questions that maybe don't get answered, or for whatever reason you come up with a question later. Feel free to post it there. Okay, so in terms of the agenda, it's going to be a very demo-heavy agenda. Mark's going to kick us off. He's going to introduce GitLab, go through some slides, explain what's going on with them, and then really, step through the product, quickly and help us understand what GitLab does. Some of the enhancements it's made to areas around CI/CD. Then Adrian's going to dive into a demo of really using GitLab with Rancher to automate building out environments, deploying code as it's written, and making testing and dev environments very easy to get access to. And then finally, Nick's going to talk about his experience and answer your questions, give you a little bit of a real world, somebody who's been doing this for 6 months, and talk about how they've implemented this at Klockner. So we've got a great agenda. Before we get started, just for those who aren't familiar with Rancher, Rancher Labs, we are a software company based in California that builds open source products. Our most popular product is Rancher. It's a full, complete management platform for containers. We also make Rancher OS, which is a lightweight Linux distro that's less than 50 megs and just runs Docker as the core init service. And finally, we have a new project that we just announced a couple months ago, which is called Project Longhorn, which is a microservice-based distributed block storage. So all these are open source projects. You can get access to them anywhere. Really, Rancher is often where people start. It is a very easy to understand product. It's used by tens of thousands of companies around the world to run their containers. There's been more than 20 million downloads of Rancher agents. And effectively what makes Rancher so great is it ties together so many pieces of technology. It implements Docker, Kubernetes, and all of the management and infrastructure services necessary to allow teams to deploy easily their applications into lots of different environments. In fact, what Rancher really does is it allows you to create these multi-tenant environments, which are basically server clusters from any infrastructure anywhere. And once they're deployed, it lays down storage, networking, load balancing, all of the infrastructure services necessary to deploy your applications. Then you can choose whether you want to use Kubernetes or ARM Cattle or Mesos or Swarm or whatever orchestration makes sense. It's all built into Rancher. You deploy those clusters, plug it into your CI process, your RBAC systems, and then use it to start deploying your applications. You can use our application catalog or run your own, or just deploy directly from a Compose or against a Kubernetes command line. So it's really geared for organizations as they adopt containers to make it very easy to get started. So very often that's what really attracts people to Rancher, is just the ease of use and the completeness of the total solution for running containers in production. So to get into the GitLab Rancher conversation, I thought it was interesting just thinking about this as we were sort of thinking about the need for this meetup, in that a lot of reasons, what makes Rancher so compelling to our users is that it really solves a lot of problems. It's often replacing a number of things, from running and managing Docker itself, to deploying and managing the orchestration of choice, to managing all the infrastructure services and managing the actual VMs and the infrastructure you're deploying. And it's often replacing maybe a ton of Chef scripts or Puppet scripts, and manual deployment of orchestration software, a lot of maybe Terraform or other types of infrastructure deployment and management scripts. So very often why people like Rancher is it sort of combines a lot of different components into a platform that just makes it very easy for people to get started. And very often it's deployed as sort of the operational side of a CI pipeline, where users are maybe have some type of code repository, most likely GitHub. They're using a CI tool like Jenkins or CircleCI. They have some type of container registry, and these are the common integration points that people put together. And one of the reasons I was so excited about GitLab, as I heard about it from more and more users, was it really kind of, much like Rancher, it sort of solved a number of different problems at the same time. It kind of comes in and implements an open source tool like Rancher that solves problems from ranging from delivering the code repository to handling all the CI and all the continuous delivery, as well as including a Docker registry. It seemed to pair really nicely. And I think that's what we're going to see today as we go through the demonstrations, is how well these two pieces of technology work together. I think that's a great time for me to transition to Mark, because I think what is just to get us started, I really want to dive into what is GitLab and how does it work. So let me share the screen with Mark. Mark, let me make you the presenter now. Okay. Can you share your screen?
Yeah, it looks like I can, although I guess I'm going to lose the slides. Maybe actually, as I can't walk through your slides, you've got 3 slides I wanted to cover. If you go back to sharing your screen, and I'll talk about those slides, and then hand it back over to me.
No problem. I'll go through your slides while you're talking.
Sorry.
And
do my clicker for me.
No problem. I don't mind at all. So there you go.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Shannon, and thanks for having me here today. And hello, everyone listening in here. I'm Mark Punsock, head of product at GitLab. For the last year or so, I've been really focusing on DevOps, CI/CD and monitoring and a few other things, and really taking, delivering on this end-to-end software development platform vision that we're talking about here. Hopefully, many of you know what GitLab is, but for those that don't, I'll dive in a little bit. If you can hit the next slide. I won't go through all these numbers. Just suffice to say, GitLab is doing pretty well. There's a whole lot of teams using it and really rapid growth. Next slide. So now many of you know us as an open source version of GitHub. Version control plus an issue tracker and merge requests or pull requests in GitHub parlance. And that makes sense because 6 years ago, GitLab was started as an open source project by Dimitri, our co-founder, who was really unhappy with the options for Git repository management. And so he decided to build his own. And it turned out that a lot of companies, large and small, really wanted full control over their source code. So self-hosting GitLab was a big hit. And then it wasn't until 2014 that GitLab, the company, was incorporated. And since then, we've added GitLab Enterprise Edition, which, with enhanced features that support, thousands of developers. And that's a paid plan on top of our open source, community edition version. And so now we call ourselves an open core product. And for those that don't want to install or maintain it themselves, we also have gitlab.com, which is a hosted version of GitLab. But today, if you can go to the next slide. So today we are so much more. We built a product that unifies every step from idea to production into a single integrated platform. We've added built-in CI/CD, which we're going to be talking about a lot today, container registry, which we'll also talk about, deployment to review apps, and built-in monitoring using Prometheus. And that monitors both the GitLab instance itself, but also the applications that you deploy from GitLab, so application performance monitoring. Now, rather than describe everything on this slide, I'd like to just jump right into a demo. So now, if you can pass control over to me.
Absolutely. Give me 1 second. Come on. Give me a second, Mark. My GoToWebinar seems to have frozen for a second. Let's work. Okay, I think it's working now. Are you the presenter?
All right. Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem. Is my screen or that window at least coming up?
Yep, I'm looking at Kubernetes dashboard.
All right, cool. Yeah, so actually what I'm going to start with here is I've got a Kubernetes cluster. This one happens to be running on Google GKE. And I've got a basically a pretty empty instance of GitLab. There's just a single project in it, and it really is a minimal Ruby app. The name does not lie. Literally, it's just a hello world and a Docker file that builds it. And so that's where I'm going to start from here, pretty much plain vanilla, but with some deep integration with the Kubernetes underneath. So now at GitLab, we believe these days that more of your team's conversations are happening in chat. So we actually bundle in Mattermost, which is an open source Slack alternative, with GitLab. So this installation automatically created Mattermost, and I'm using idea.production.com as my little example here. But so this is where we would expect people to be chatting about ideas, coming up with great ideas, whatever, and then be like, oh, well, you don't have to shift to another tool and potentially lose your train of thought. So from here, if I've got an idea for this minimal Ruby app, I'm just going to use chat ops here to create a new issue directly. So you created an issue for us. We can link back into our project. Oh, I clicked on the wrong link there. Go directly to the issue. And we can see we've got this nice little issue. So yeah, we've got issue management. That's pretty cool. But we also go beyond that, and we have issue boards. Kind of think of like Trello style, or these days actually GitHub and a whole bunch of other folks have issue boards. But and issue boards here where I can plan this issue. And so as a project manager or whatever, I would drag this in and say, oh yeah, this sprint, we're gonna improve the home page. And as a developer, I'll go and just drag it right into the doing column, and and kind of just work from this issue board. And it's a really great way to manipulate issues. So now that we've got that, we're gonna actually start coding. So the first thing I'm gonna do here though is finish our configuration, because this was a plain little thing, and I don't have any CI/CD or anything like that set up. So I'm just going to pick this, this default template for Kubernetes, which really automates everything. And I'll go over it later, so I won't really show much right now. But I'm just going to go and put that into, push it right in master, and commit that. So now we can actually start editing. Go to here, and I'll just start, make a little amazing change that's totally going to change the quality of our homepage. And I'm going to give it a target branch here of 1-homepage, because our issue is issue number 1. And so then this lets GitLab know that this merge request will go and close that automatically. So it added that text for us. And I'll go ahead and submit that merge request. Now, most developers are familiar with, the pull request or the merge request model. I don't really feel like I need to dig too much into this, but what's really cool about this is that because I created this merge request in this new branch, it actually kicked off a CI/CD pipeline automatically, from that configuration that I just created. And so actually, I can just dive in and start showing what it's doing. This one's a really straightforward one. It builds a Docker image, builds the Docker file. And then what it does is create a review app. The review app is really, really cool. If you haven't used these things, they may very well change your life. But the idea is that instead of just looking at the code, I can actually look at a running version of the application, running that code. And so especially for like designers or product managers or anybody else who really just doesn't want to pull the code locally to take a look at it, or like if you're reviewing CSS changes and you don't know how to eyeball exactly what the changes are going to be, like, hey, you can just look at the review app that's running, and it's a really, really useful feature. So the review app is finished. We go back to the merge request, and we now see that right on the merge request, it'll tell me that this has been deployed to this review app, and hey, there's a handy little link that I can go and see the change. Which is really awesome. Now, obviously, it doesn't really matter for this one. I could have guessed that looking at the code, but you get the idea. Sometimes things are a lot more complicated. Also,
Mark, a question that came in, just to stop, is everything you're showing here in the open source version, or are we looking at the enterprise version here?
So I happen to be using the enterprise version. So far, everything I've shown is in the community edition. Maybe I will highlight when I get to the enterprise edition stuff later on. Most of that is about the deep integration with Kubernetes. Actually, deploy boards is probably the only feature I'm going to show that's enterprise. But yeah, what we have, so this idea to production scope, like these 10 steps we talk about, there is something in each of those 10 steps in the community edition. That's like just sort of our value strategy, whatever. There's a free version of everything. And then there might be enhanced versions in some of those things in the enterprise edition. Great question.
Okay, great.
All right, so now let's say this was, pretend for a moment this was a lot more complicated, and I actually, there was some bug, and I'm banging my head against the wall because I can't reproduce it locally, but it shows up in production or whatever, and I want to be able to go and log into the box that's running the code. Here, I just click one little button, and I open up SSH into the pod or the container that's running this thing, and I've got all my files there. And I could go here and actually edit this. And now click through, and I could see that my, it changed there. And I'm like, oh, now it works. That's great. Of course, that's just for debugging, right? We don't really recommend you do this on your production environment or things like that. But it's really useful if you do need to, dig into something. And it's just really handy because of this, Kubernetes integration again. All right, so now let's go back to our merge request here. And just obviously some standard features, but in case you haven't seen this stuff, I can obviously look at the diff and I can make comments. And these comments would show up in a thread that everybody would be able to see, and I'd get emails about them and all these kind of alerts and whatever else. But you can do all that kind of stuff. But I'm just going to go ahead now and say, this looks great. I'll merge this into master. And we see that it's actually kicked off another pipeline. There's actually two pipelines running right now. One, which is interesting, is it's running this cleanup task. Because we closed the merge request and we deleted the branch, we're actually going to delete that review app automatically. So you don't have to worry about any cleanup. It's just finishing that pipeline. But then we also kicked off another pipeline on the master branch to rerun everything, just in case somebody else had made other changes that might conflict, whatever. It reruns all your tests again. And so, yeah, we've done the build. It's still running. Staging, deploy. You can follow along for a moment. Kind of boring to watch this stuff, but there, it just finished anyway. So yeah, it just reran, and now it deployed to staging. And if we go to our environments here, we can see that the review app is gone. Staging now has this deploy. Production has not yet been deployed to yet because this was a fresh app. I could, from here, click on the production link, and that would go ahead and deploy it to production. If I go into the merge request, this is actually one of the really cool little things I like to show off. Even after the merge request is merged, we know that this merge request is running in staging, and so we still update this. I can't tell you how many times I've run into this as a product manager where some developer says, oh yeah, it's done, and the merge request is merged. I'm like, great, and I go and try it in production, and I'm like, wait a minute, it's not there. I'm like, oh, well, it hasn't been deployed to production yet. I'm like, well, how do I know this? And like, hey, we've solved that. Now you know this is in staging, but it's not yet into production. But of course, I can click through and actually see it in staging if I wanted, but I for sure know that it's not in production yet. So again, there's a couple of places I can go. I can go into this pipeline here, and I could deploy it to production. But getting back to chat ops, we really like to do these things from chat so that there's more public visibility of it, there's history, whatever. So from here, I can do my minimal Ruby app, and I will just deploy staging to production. And that kicks off another deploy. Now it's not rebuilding here, it's just doing the deploy portion. The Docker image is the same, the tests have already run, so I don't need to rerun all that stuff. I'm really just doing the deploy. And if I click through to environments, soon this will refresh. Probably should have waited until I actually finished, but let's see what's doing. Okay, now it's done. Okay, so now we see the production is there. And so that's great. We can now see that I'm running the same SHA in staging and production, and it's all been updated, and it's really great. But now here is where I'm going to show you an enterprise feature only. If I click on this, I actually can see what we call the deploy board. Staging is only running one pod, but production, I've got 10 pods configured for production. And we can actually see, if I were to do another deploy, we can actually see this roll out over time. We can see whether the deploy is currently ongoing or whether it's finished. In newer versions, I happen to be showing you, I think 9.0 or 9.1, but in 9.2, we introduced canary deploys. And so I could actually even see that like a couple of these instances are running a canary and the rest are running production. Pretty awesome stuff. Now going further, we don't actually stop our production. We have this sort of phrase of the idea to production that's sort of a mantra lately, but we went beyond production a little while ago. So anyway, we can also go through, I'm going to show you staging just because it's been around a little bit longer, but I can click on monitoring and we see monitoring of our staging environment. I know I actually did nothing to configure this. You saw that that the app had nothing in it. This is just because it's running in Kubernetes and we can use the Kubernetes data about the memory and CPU utilization, and we've got Prometheus running, and so it knows how to scrape all this automatically. And so we can see, I just did a deploy, and so maybe CPU went up a little bit, but memory's been pretty constant. And this, right now, it's kind of useless. It's only going back a couple of minutes, right? It hasn't been, actually, staging may have been running for a little while, I don't know. But the idea is you've got like 8 hours worth, and you can see if any changes are there. In newer versions, you can even see like the lines of where deploys happen, and then you can tell like, oh, memory went up by 20% after deploy. I can't demo that right now, but that's all there. This monitoring is also just part of the community edition, so this works out of the box. There is one other aspect, sort of a meta feedback thing, something we call cycle analytics. And this is something that lets you track not just the performance of your application, but more performance sort of your team or of your company. And it tracks basically the time from issue through all the stages to production. So 8 minutes. It's pretty awesome from idea to production. That's a really good benchmark. Wish more companies would get there. But anyway, that's basically it. So in less than 10 minutes, we took an idea, through issue tracking, planning, issue boards, testing, continuous integration, reviewing with merge request, review apps, all this kind of stuff, and all on an environment running on a container scheduler so that it all scales really well. Built in with GitLab and GitLab runners for CI, and monitoring the applications themselves so they can scale. And that's it. That's really it, the overview. So.
Mark, there's a couple questions that came in while you were talking.
Sure.
The first one was from Espen. He asked two questions. He said, first, can I see the Zunit output? And then the X unit, I guess is how you say that, X unit output. And then the other one was, what is it? A Zunit X unit, an X unit output. And then I pin a CI job to one runner. So those are the sort of two questions that Espen had. Do you want to try and tackle those?
Sure. So XUnit, we don't have first-class support for XUnit. What we do have is sort of a combination of things. If you are using XUnit and you generate an HTML report, for example, you can use GitLab Pages, which is basically an HTML, sort of render. It's not more than just HTML. It could also be like Middleman or Jekyll or whatever. But you can take that output and as one of your CI jobs, basically spit it to the public directory and label it with pages, and then it'll just automatically get published as a report. So we actually use that on our GitLab CE repo, I believe. We show code coverage as a GitLab Pages report. We do have an ongoing issue to make it a little bit more first class, and I think the current winning proposal is to we have artifacts. I didn't show anything there other than we're using Docker, but you can also have file-based artifacts. And so if you put your HTML output of your XUnit analysis into an artifacts and bundle that up, you can download them and browse them and things like that from the web interface. Well, people have asked for a logical thing of like, why can't you just render the HTML in line? And there are some security concerns of why we're not doing that, but we've got a solution to work around those security concerns. So hopefully in the next 3 months or something like that, you'll see a better way to deal with first-class published reports and stuff like that. And I think I forgot your second question. Sorry, what was it again?
The second one was
tying
in a CI process to a single runner, I think is what it was.
Yeah, so I obviously didn't talk about architecture here at all, but the runner architecture is pretty darn awesome, if I say so myself. I didn't make it, so I'm not, whatever. But we can use tags, for example, and if you tag a job and you tag a runner with that same tag, and you specify that that runner won't run anything that doesn't match its tags, then yeah, you could say that that job will go to one tag, to run runner. So for example, we have our own blog. We have a multi-step pipeline for it, and most of the steps we just use our shared runners for, but the last step actually needs a specific runner because that's where the web server is, and we actually run the runner on the web server, and we basically copy over the files directly there. And so it's obviously not a runner we want everybody using, or anybody in fact, other than this one specific job. And so yeah, you absolutely can do that.
Cool. Bunch more questions. This one was from Axel. He had two questions. One, does the build system support Docker-based builds? So builds using a Docker container as build context instead of the host. That was the first question.
Yeah, of course. We definitely support Docker. We also support anything, but ultimately most of the stuff is using Docker. This is where things get a little bit fuzzy because it's so flexible that it's really hard to describe. There are 7 different versions of the runner. There's a shell executor, but then there's a Docker. There's also Windows, and there's you can run on Mac OS, and then there's a Kubernetes one that runs specifically on the Kubernetes cluster and obviously uses Docker underneath, but auto scales using Kubernetes. Anyway, absolutely, you can build Docker images. You can push to our built-in Docker registry. This app that I just wrote, for example, spat out to the Docker registry. It spat out 2 images right now. And you can either in a job use Docker commands like Docker run and then an image, or you can actually just specify that the Docker job runs using your image. So if for whatever reason I had one stage of pipeline that built a Docker image and then the next stage wants to consume that Docker image and run the tests in that Docker image, you can do that. So I should have just said yes, you can do whatever you want, but that was a slightly more detailed answer.
No, that sounds. So the other question Axel had asked was, can you define roles for chat ops? So dev can do certain things, admin can do other things. Who's allowed to deploy to staging, this type of thing. Can you talk about that sort of RBAC within the platform and how that gets tied into the chat ops side?
Sure, it's kind of hard to describe really quickly, but we have multiple levels. So we've got reporter, developer, master, and owner. We don't yet actually have an operator role, and surprisingly, other people haven't really asked for it. I've got an issue, and I'm waiting for people to thumbs up it so that I will put effort on it. I think it's going to be important soon. Within the developer role and things like that, we have all sorts of controls about who can merge into master. You can set it from only masters can merge into master. Where you could say all developers could, or you could say, well, nobody can. You can only merge into topic branches, and then, or I shouldn't say merge in that case. You can only push directly into master. You could say nobody pushes to master, but somebody can merge. So if you've got a merge request that has been approved, has passed CI, well, then it can be merged into master. So you can lock down a whole bunch of things that way. Lately, we've built in some more enhancements to the security so that things like manual jobs will, not everybody can run a manual job, so you can have a scenario where the actual deploy to production button, not everybody can push that button, even though you then merged it from a merge request and everything else is valid. Only authentic people, specific people can actually do the deploy to production. And we've got lots of other things we want to enhance there to give you even finer grained things. But right now, yeah, we've got some basic security there, and then a lot more around sort of the master merge kind of logic. I think, to be clear, that's a case where Enterprise Edition, I believe, has more features than Community Edition. So if I were to show you now, it would be the Enterprise version. I don't remember exactly offhand which ones the Community Edition has. But or vice versa. The enterprise has, the community edition doesn't.
Mike had a question. Mike asked, do you guys have examples of CI YAML to promote the same Docker image from one environment to another? Any example you could show or point people to that might help there, Mark?
Yeah, well, so this project itself actually has, the GitLab CI YAML. I didn't cover it much, but it's got a bunch of stages. The production stage, as I showed, is a manual action. It's currently set up as a manual action. So staging this job, I don't know if you, maybe I can bump that up a little bit. I've kind of obfuscated what it's actually doing because I'm using this thing called auto deploy, which does an awful lot of magic. But underneath, because I have a Docker file, it's actually building the Docker image and deploying that Docker image. But it is configured to automatically deploy basically whenever master is pushed to. But production is a manual action on master. So first off, that's saying a topic branch can't be pushed to production, but if it's in master, then it can be manually pushed. And in this case, I'm only doing the deploy part again, and it knows what build was built previously, and so it just goes ahead and builds that, takes that build rather, and deploys it. Now that build could again be a file-based, it could be a tarball. In this case, it's a Docker image. I could probably show you some more examples that actually show you the Docker stuff a little bit. But basically, yeah, it's really easy just using our container registry to go and grab an image and then go ahead and redeploy that anywhere you like.
Awesome. There's a question. There are a couple questions about this. I'm just see if I can. So David asked just where are all those containers running, and then someone else asked about Kubernetes versus other types of orchestration. So just to answer the question, David, you had asked where are all these containers running. So all these things are being deployed to a GKE instance of Kubernetes. Mark talked about that earlier. But really any Kubernetes endpoint, like a Kubernetes environment in Rancher, would be able to connect. There was another question from Stefan, and he was saying, we lose GitLab, love it, love all the CI/CD features. We're not using Kubernetes, we're using Swarm and Cattle. Are any of these GitLab features that are tied into Kubernetes going to be coming to Swarm or Cattle or other types of orchestration? I'll turn that question over to Mark.
All right. So actually, the first thing, everything I've shown here is running in this Kubernetes cluster. GitLab itself is running here. There's the GitLab main Rails application, a Postgres database, a Redis database. But then I've also got a runner. I can't really see the name of it. It's just the GitLab runner. And this is sort of the single auto-scaling runner. The idea is that it runs, it connects, and then as it gets jobs, it goes and spins up another pod just to run that job. And then the pod disappears afterwards. And so this is a great auto-scaling thing. If you have a job or like 20 different pipelines run at a time, or one pipeline that has 20 jobs in it that are all run in parallel, you'll just go and spin up 20 runners and run them all in parallel. And then the application itself, I think I have to refresh to get the namespace in there. Minimal Ruby app 3, I guess, is the namespace that this one was chosen by. And it's got the production, the 10 production pods, and there's a staging one, and then it's got a couple of Postgres databases. The app didn't use it, but part of auto deploy, it creates a Postgres just in case. So all that stuff is running there. So yeah, it's all running in the cluster. Each app gets their own namespace currently, although there's a whole bunch of debate about whether people should have 2 namespaces, one separated for production or whatever, but lots of things there. So right now, all of our efforts are focused on sort of raw Kubernetes. This does run then on any Kubernetes. We do have, like Mesosphere is working with us on Mesos integration. And as you'll see today, maybe you'll see some other things with Rancher. I don't know about any efforts yet to make it work specifically on Swarm, though. Not positive about that. Our focus is on Kubernetes. We're open to community contributions and contributions from partners. But right now, we're still fleshing out our vision for how this all works.
There's a question from Philip. He said, "Does GitLab have an artifact repo beyond the
So
Docker?"
yeah, well, so obviously we've got the Docker registry, right? But we have file artifacts. Again, this demo doesn't have any, but you can bundle up artifacts, anything in file system, and then you can make them available for download or browsing from within the web interface. It's not like Artifactory, if that's what you're asking. It's not a fully managed sort of standalone thing that has a Maven interface and a whatever bundler interface and all these other kind of things. But we do definitely have artifacts, and we use them in multiple ways. But at least you can use artifacts to pass between jobs. So a build generates a tarball, and then a subsequent stage actually untars that thing and runs it, and run tests on it or whatever. But also they can be available then for download and publish as a release kind of thing.
Great. There are lots of questions coming in, Mark. I know we've got a lot more to go through. There was one question was just as someone was asking, how does this approach does this approach replace Jenkins? And maybe you can talk about that.
I'd say the short answer is yes. It replaces Jenkins. That's pretty much the whole point. There might be some areas where we don't, but yeah, the idea is it replaces Jenkins.
So lots of questions. I think we're going to have to kind of take a break from these. We'll try to get back to them as we get further along in the session. But Mark, I know you have you have to run at the top of the hour, so it was really appreciate the demo. Appreciate walking through all of these different concepts and giving us a deep dive on GitLab. Now I'm going to switch the presentation over to Adrian, and Adrian is going to walk us through. Really, kind of show a working implementation of this with Rancher, with a cattle environment in this case, and show sort of how that works as well. Adrian, you should be the presenter now. Let me know if you've received the ball, and you can start sharing your screen.
I have received the ball, and let me know when you can see my screen.
Can see it.
Fantastic. Hey, everyone. So my name's Adrian. I'm a field engineer here at Rancher, and first of all, thanks for that fantastic demonstration of GitLab's capabilities. I've been using GitLab for a number of years. I'm a huge GitLab proponent, and I'm excited to be able to show you some of the ways that you can not only install GitLab within Rancher and just cut right through some of the configuration options to just get a deploy out really fast, but then also how you can use GitLab and Rancher to provide scenarios for CI/CD. So as you saw, GitLab can handle all of these things. I heard questions come through about artifacts, and that's something that I don't have in my demonstration, but that I have used. You can absolutely build stuff, cache it, pull it down to the next phase, and continue to work with it. And I'll mention that a little bit later on as well. After you get your stuff built, though, inside of GitLab, the question is, what do you do with it? In the case of the Kubernetes demonstration we just saw, we have that answer for Kubernetes, but there was a question about what if you're using cattle? What I hope to provide is a demonstration of how you can take advantage of Rancher's features for things such as host management, container scheduling, and handling resources for environments and resources in a cloud environment, and then get all the way to where your container is deployed for either direct consumption by your end users, or in the case of the development scenario that I'll talk about at the end, actual usability testing or anything that requires a real implementation. What that essentially looks like from a flowchart perspective is this. These are the pieces where you have a developer pushing stuff into the various components that GitLab provides. You've got the repository, moving that into the CI, moving that into the container registry, and the piece that I'm going to hit on is that red arrow that gets this stuff into Rancher, and then we're back into the loop. Deploying GitLab, we'll jump over to browser here. I was actually going to show a full deploy of GitLab, and I realized I don't have enough time for that, although it is very easy to get GitLab up and running inside of Rancher. Rancher provides the ability to have load balancers handle all of your SSL offloading, and by default, GitLab doesn't expect that. So there's some options that you will need to provide, this looks like a lot, but it's not. You can provide this entire thing, just changing some various things for your URLs to an environment variable within Rancher and bring up a GitLab environment complete with SSL offloading, CI, container registry, everything that you need to get up and running. This, as well as the code that I'm demonstrating today, will be available at the end of the meetup, so you guys can just come in and change some URLs and be running GitLab really fast by this afternoon. After GitLab's up and running inside of a Rancher environment, if you want to handle SSL offloading, we have the Let's Encrypt community catalog item that you can deploy, and you can set it up for whatever URL, or if you have your own SSL certificates, you can simply load those into Rancher, and within the load balancer, assign them for routing traffic directly to your GitLab backend. In this case, I'm using selectors to send these various URLs to the appropriate backend, but you can also just select the services directly. After GitLab's up and running, there are a couple of configuration options that you need to do. You need to log in, and if you want to disable the ability of anybody to sign up and use your environment, that's in the admin settings. Also, you'll need to add your own SSH key, and then you're off to the races. I've got a couple of sample projects here that we'll go through. And the last piece that you'll need is the runner. The runner the runner for the demonstration that I'm giving will actually use a variant of the Docker in Docker deployment strategy, where the runner has the ability to build Docker containers that are peers to itself. So it can actually build stuff that then is available for direct use at a horizontal level, instead of having another Docker inside with images buried further inside. All right, so get to this. I have two environments that I've built here. The first is just a demonstration Nginx environment, and I've pushed nothing into it yet. The second is a deployment environment that I'll use for the advanced example in a moment. So I will simply change. My CI file is super simple. I use GitLab's own CI variables to define the actual location of the registry and to set some standard naming. So I can use this CI file across all of my Docker images and have a uniform standard of how my stuff is named. I will end up building images that are tagged by their branch. So if I jump over here, I've already built this. And you can see here that whatever comes in and the master branch, I also tag latest, just so that you don't necessarily need to use a tag, but anything that we build in a branch itself will have its own container referenced by its branch name here. The various stages that I'm using, I've build and release. We log into the GitLab environment here. We'll do a basic build, and this is the initial tag. I'm calling it test image, but this is simply tagging it with the branch name. And then for master, we're actually adding a second tag, which in this case is latest. With this pushed, we can come over and actually follow the pipeline while it's doing whatever it is that it's doing. So in our case, because we have a very simple job here, we're going to go through a build and a release like you saw. And it's just going to build it. It's going to push it directly into GitLab's registry. And with that done, we'll be able to deploy it. So deploying this inside of Rancher is as easy as deploying anything else. Let's make sure that I've added my registry here, which I have. So I'm able to log in, and I'll just create a new stack. And a new service inside of that stack. This is all basic Rancher cattle deployment stuff. Here we're simply using the container registry that's provided by GitLab to deploy a container. I already have this. Oh, actually, I need to give that a label for the load balancer to select it. I'll finish that upgrade. And with that, so there's our basic application. Now that was a ton of manual effort, but all of that demonstrates how the functionality that GitLab provides integrates with the functionality that Rancher provides, but that's not what we're here to actually show. There was a question about how if GitLab can use Docker images in its CI build process. This, absolutely, yes, it can, and this is what I'll be demonstrating. There's an ANSI pattern that we want to avoid when we're building Docker containers, where we don't want to compile in all of the build essentials, composer, various pieces of the tool chain that are necessary to build things, but that we don't actually want in our final application. The way that GitLab CI enables us to do this is we can bring up an image with our code inside of it, operate on that code, and then either cache it, put artifacts in place, and move that entire compiled object to the next phase. And I think of this as like a conveyor belt where each job is a Docker image that's operating on the code, and then as it moves its way through, what you end up with is your code being built into your final application, and then that's the final piece that you're deploying. Why do you want to use a CI/CD system? Everybody has their own reasons. I personally believe that any task that requires a human to remember to do it will eventually fail. So I look to automate everything that I can, whether that's through CI/CD system, whether that's using a configuration management system like Ansible or Puppet or Chef, or for anybody who's on the call, it's been around for a number of years, CF Engine, enabling us to create procedures for activities, and then we are always executing those procedures, and they're always being executed the same way. If the outcome is not what we expect, then we revise the procedure. But at no point should an individual have to remember to follow a certain series of steps. That eventually will fail. Another reason for using CI/CD services, so avoiding human error, I guess, is probably the main reason. We want to make things easy as well. There might be end developers or end stream customers downstream who who don't know how to use some of the tools or don't want to learn them, or simply want to be able to just write code and push it and have output come out the other side. They don't want to learn how to use Rancher. So enabling tools for them to get the output that they desire is a great way to increase their productivity and maintain their morale. The ways that you can do this using Rancher are, you can do it with Rancher CLI. That's a tool that allows us to interact with a Rancher environment. You can bring hosts up, you can interface with environments and services and stacks and everything. You could do it with shell scripting. The Rancher API is very accessible, and you can access it directly with curl. You can use tools that exist. There are libraries for communicating directly with the API. You can roll your own, by all means. The first one that I want to show you is a tool from a gentleman named CDRX. I don't actually know if that's his name, but that's who he shows up as. And he's written Rancher GitLab deploy. And with this, we can take an existing service, such as the one that we've deployed, and upon modification, perform an upgrade of it. This use case is appropriate for when you already have an environment built and you simply want to be able to push your code to it and have that code be visible, whether that's in a development environment, production environment, staging, whatever. So for that, the CI file looks a little bit different. I'm still building stuff the same way, and in the deployment phase, I'm actually going to bring up a container using his image. And then inside of that container, I'll be running this command. And you can get the various commands that are available from the README file for his container. This will take our code and the container that we've compiled, and it will go and reach out to the Rancher environment, and it will actually perform an upgrade. And to make that visible, let's just change this. And I'm going to split my environment here so that we can see both the build process happening and also the container itself. So hopefully I'll be able to get over here fast enough. So this is running. You see we've got build, release, and deploy. I'm just going to jump over here to cache to be ready to watch. As soon as deploy starts showing output, you'll see up here this container is going to go ahead and upgrade. And it should only take a moment because we changed very little. There's the upgrade. It's going to automatically finish it. There's an option if you don't want that to happen, you can make it stay in upgraded state so somebody can come in and do some manual checking. And now back over here. So we have our content updated. This is a fantastic way to get your existing environments maintained. A more advanced use case, and this is a little far-fetched, but it demonstrates the capabilities that are available to you via Rancher's API. So in the previous one, you saw that there's all of these prerequisites. You had to create it, add a host, add GitLab registry, go through all this manual stuff. But imagine a scenario where you wanted to be able to commit and push your code, you wanted it to build your environment, and you wanted it to actually create an entire EC2 infrastructure for you and put your content out there. Now, we're going to deploy a simple Nginx container out there, which is kind of a waste of resources, but this could be extended to anything that you can do with Docker Compose. You can bring up databases, you can have all of your your scaffolding go in for your testing, and the imaginary use case here is that this is usability testing, so you actually want your application available for your QA department to hit it and do whatever they need to do, and then at the end, you want them to be able to tear it down. Anybody who's worked with a cloud provider who's on this call has experienced the oh my god of the bill at the end of the month because you left something running that you forgot about, and you use those services, so you got to pay for it, but it's painful. Some of you may have test environments that exist, but even if you're operating in those test environments for a full 8 hours a day, there's 16 hours a day that those environments are running that you're not using them. You can shut them down at the end of the day if you remember to do so, and then you got to bring them back up. There's the headache of bringing them up the next day, and maybe even within that 8-hour period, you're not using them the full 8 hours. So imagine a situation where you can literally spin up an instance, use it for an hour or 30 minutes or whatever, and then just tear it down. Your actual testing process is now measured, the dollar cost is measured in pennies. So that's what we're going to show. And there's going to be a lag in the middle of this when it brings up the host, during which time I can take some questions, but we'll just watch it happen. In order to accomplish this, break out of that. In order to accomplish this, I wrote some basic code that calls the API, and I created a basic container called deploy. This is a proof of concept. This is not some production-ready solution, but this will be available for you guys to take a look at the end of the call, or the end of the webinar, to start poking around and hopefully use this in your own environments. Very simple CI file again. During the deploy phase, I'm bringing up my deploy container, and I'm calling the deploy script that I wrote with, just a simple command of deploy. I'm going to pause then, and I'm going to have a manual process later that allows me to tear down the environment. All right, so it's already ahead of us. So let's set up a split screen here again so we can watch both of these go by. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to go and create a new Rancher environment. I have to refresh just so I get the environment in the dropdown. So there's my new environment based on the SHA hash of the commit. Into this environment, it's going to launch a host. That host is going to take a really long time to come up because it's Docker machine. Once it comes up, it's actually going to create a stack, deploy, and do everything associated with it. So while we wait for this to happen, Shannon, are there any questions that I can answer?
Yeah, there are a bunch. The first one was from Cristobal. He said, is there a GitLab CE stack for deployment in the Rancher catalog? And then he was saying that it seems like you're showing kind of all of GitLab running in a single container, and then a GitLab runner, but you might also deploy it as more of a microservices architecture. Do you know if there's one or more different catalog items, and how are people sort of deploying and running GitLab in Rancher? So more of the deployment of GitLab as opposed to the integration.
Okay, so there is a GitLab catalog item, and it expects that you are exposing it directly on 80 and 443, and it expects also that you're going to bundle your SSL certificates inside of it. It's a one-click launch, but after that there's additional configuration, and it's better suited for people who have experience deploying GitLab, although if you have experience deploying GitLab, you probably already have a GitLab instance somewhere that you're running. My preferred way of running GitLab is actually to have a GitLab container, and you can schedule this on a host with enough resources to handle it if the same way you can launch it on a host directly. And then I just use a single shared runner because I'm operating in small environments. You can actually run multiple runners if you want to. I wanted to show the whole installation of this, but I have a Sidekick container for postfix to handle sending out emails. And I'm able to get all of this with that omnibus config that I showed you.
And if somebody wanted to do a more microservices type deployment of GitLab, there's no reason they couldn't. I mean, you certainly just would develop a new compose file and configure, kind of a multi-master deployment, I'm assuming. Is that right?
I'm not understanding what a microservices deployment of GitLab would be. GitLab is entirely self-contained. If you want to break out portions of it, for example, if you wanted to run it against your own Postgres database, then you certainly could. Just run a separate Postgres container or point it at Postgres that you have. But same with Redis and the various components that GitLab has inside of it, I find just work fantastic if you let it alone to do its thing.
Got it. So there was another question, a couple more questions. So one was for the CI. There was a question from Alex. He just said, "Is it obligatory to use Kubernetes for the CI stuff, or can we use Cattle?" I think what we're showing here, Alex, is all using cattle. So you can certainly use everything we're showing here is in a cattle environment. So you can choose to use cattle or Kubernetes. They're both legitimate ways of deploying containers in Rancher. If you want to use Kubernetes, there's a handful of features that Mark showed that are integrations from GitLab into Kubernetes, like the monitoring piece that they showed using Prometheus, and a bit of the direct push stuff from the UI that are pretty cool. So it's a good reason if you're debating which way to go. Kubernetes has some nice integration points. That said, what we're showing here with Adrian's deployment is all in cattle. It works great. The runners, all the CI implementation works well as well. Can you talk about that a little bit more, maybe, Adrian? Anything you want to kind of touch on that?
No, you answered it great. There's no requirement to use one or the other. It's whatever is appropriate for your environment.
Great. And there's another question from Sebastian. He said, are there any examples you could show, or could you show an example with multi-container stack updated by CI/CD? How might it be different with a LAMP stack or something similar? Anything you want to talk to, Adrian, there? I think you're mostly going to try and keep it simple for the demo, but do you want to talk about what might be different as you move to a more complex application?
Yeah, sure. I can absolutely talk about it. I can't demo it because I'd have to write it, and I'm on the spot. But I can certainly talk about it. So back over here in my simple use case scenario, I simply upgraded a single stack. And this by default looks to upgrade based on the group name and the project name. So over here, not there. Down here, we are in Meetup Demo Engine X, so that was what it shows. But you can tell it to upgrade anything. So if this was a different stack name and multiple services in here, I can individually upgrade all of them, stop, start, do various things with them. Similarly, in the more advanced demo that is actually finished now, what this starts is actually from a Docker Compose file. So while I only built this image, if there were other dependencies that it had, other images that it needed to pull, Postgres, Redis, from the earlier example, just having those in the Docker Compose, it will spin them up. And additionally, because I'm making API calls, I'm not even limited to launching a single stack. I can launch multiple stacks and control all of them.
There's kind of a similar question from Daniel Mendieta, and he said, what do we do if our CI process requires an update that involves the database? Should we test with a copy of a snapshot or snapshot the production database? Like, what's the best process if you're trying to take even a simple blog or something where you've got a database component to it as well as an app component to it? How do you recommend people approach that?
Well, let's use a really basic example of WordPress. So WordPress doesn't actually lend itself very well to being put into a repository, and doing development work inside of it is challenging at best. However, with Git submodules, you can actually check out the WordPress core itself. So the only part that you have in your repo are the changes that you need to make. The database portion of that, where I've encountered this at previous jobs, we kept a staging version of the database, and on a set interval, we would just dump the production database and load it into the staging database. And then as long as you're talking to it by the same host name, www.whatever.com, and you can manage that via Etsy hosts, there's no really more graceful way to do it besides that, then you can point it at your test stuff and your test database and make sure that your changes work.
Okay, do you want to kind of wrap up your demo piece here and kind of show what all's happened and how the infrastructure got spun up?
Sure. So the last thing that I spat out here was an actual URL, and it pulled the IP from the host that it created. So remember what we did? We actually launched a host, tagged it, it spun up all of its infrastructure stacks, and then we created the stack and deployed our container as a service. The names of these are in the configuration file that I created. And then it gave me the IP of the host, and our site's out there. So the limit of our usability testing is basically, does it load? And in this case, it does. So we're done. In order to end this, I simply come back into my pipeline, and you'll see that now there's a manual job that's waiting. It's a manual job called teardown. And if I just select that, I come back up here to host. you'll see that it'll switch in a moment. Yeah, there we go. Everything's being removed. And so it actually tears down the containers, tears down the host, and probably before I can even show you more, it purged the entire environment. So if I were to refresh this, that environment's gone. So every resource created for that environment by Rancher gets destroyed. And that whole thing cost us a penny. So that's it for the demo. I do want to give credit to the gentleman who's going to be speaking next, because the idea for this came from a product that they created internally called Shia, and hopefully he'll be able to talk a little bit about that. Everything that you've seen me use today is available out on gitlab.com, including the GitLab Omnibus config, that if you paste that in as an environment variable for GitLab, you can spin up a GitLab instance in Rancher in seconds, and then the Rancher GitLab deploy module from CDRX.
Awesome. Adrian, thanks for this. There are dozens of questions, and what I was thinking is, if you wouldn't mind, maybe you can answer some of those in the chat while Nick goes through, and just share the answer with everyone who's attending, if you can. And I know, unfortunately, Mark had to leave, so there are questions that are about GitLab that maybe we don't have the answer to. We'll try and get you a response via email or something else. But right now I want to change and turn it over to Nick, because I'm really looking forward to Nick's presentation and talking a little bit about how he and the team at Klockner are actually putting all this stuff into production as a development team. So Nick, can you share your screen? You should be able to. You should have a button to share your screen now.
Yes, I can.
And if not, I can always share my version of your slides. But there it is.
You see something? Great.
I can, yeah.
Okie dokie. So yeah, let me start by first thanking Mark from GitLab, because like with every release that they have done, we had the feeling that they've been reading our minds regarding features that we needed. So even though he's not there anymore, thank you very much. And then thanks to you, Shen and Adrian, for supporting us with Rancher, and it's been really awesome to use it. And now I'm going to be talking about a bit how we build up our CI/CD system at Klockner. And I might also, like, if there are some questions, I can show you some stuff. There's also like another presentation for me that I did at LinuxCon, so I can also link to that. And there's also some code online, so we'll come to that afterwards. And Shen, if I'll be blabbing too much, then just like gently give me a sign.
I will not be gentle, but it looks great. Go for it. Blab to your heart's content. I think we're gonna have a lot of questions.
Okay. Can you still see it?
I can see it. It looks great. Full screen.
Okay. Okay. So first of all, who's Klockner? So this is our dev team, and Klockner is actually one of the biggest steel traders in the world. It's a multinational corporation, and they created a corporate startup, Klockner, which is kind of tasked with digitalizing the steel business. And the steel business is like kind of old school, so they still use mostly fax and telephone and stuff like that. And now we want to shift like a couple of billion in revenue to our online tools. And we've already succeeded in, I don't know, shifting like 20% of it. So we're kind of doing a good job. And what we're currently working on is that we have a set of, we have some software that has been developed by an agency, and also some stuff that we've been developing on our own. And basically what we're building right now is a pretty big microservice architecture. And we had the idea from the beginning that we wanted to use Docker for everything, like in development and also, if possible, in production. And so we had to search for a solution that gives us like the flexibility, the opportunity, like the possibilities actually to do that. And I've been tasked in the beginning when I started like a year ago with like taking a look, and stumbled upon Rancher, and we've already been using GitLab, so I kind of start working on the integration. And also, like, one of the things, like, automate all the things, it's like, we don't need to build for like platted scale. Like, there are only a limited amount of steel traders in the world, like whatnot, I don't know, like 10,000 or 100,000 or something. So even though we don't want to build slow software, it's not that we have to support like software that, like, we're not Facebook, basically. So we want to optimize for ease of development and speed of development. And that means automating it as much as possible so that we can focus on actually building new stuff, basically. And what I'll be showing you is basically two workflows that we have. One is our basic deploy workflow, and the other one is basically what Adrian has been hinting to or also showed, kind of like deploying a whole QA environment. And I think what's like a bit different here is that we have a like microservice architecture with currently, I think, like 22 projects in one environment that have, I don't know, maybe like 100 different services or something are running. Okay, so what are the components in this system? So first of all, it's GitLab. We use the Enterprise Edition, although we don't really use any enterprise features. It's mostly to support GitLab. So we use it as a code repository. We use the internal Docker registry, and we use the CI/CD pipelines. We basically only use the GitLab Docker runner for everything. So this runs our stages. We build other Docker images with it, and we also use it for deploying. Then, of course, we have a Rancher instance. That's like a high availability Rancher cluster with 3 nodes and n amount of kettle hosts. And yeah, basically what Rancher does for us is like it provides the API that we can use to deploy and bootstrap environments, and it runs Docker containers in the end for us. Then, like, one of the components is that we have like mostly Ruby apps that we run. We also have some other software, but mostly Ruby apps that run in Docker containers. And like 2 components that we created on our own. One is this Shire you've been hearing about. It's yeah, I don't know if you know the video, but just Google Shire, just do it, and you'll be motivated for a month. But like basically. Basically, Shire is like our kind of glue between Rancher and GitLab. So I wrote this tool based on the Rancher API gem. We also have like a new version of the Rancher API gem out now, which supports the Rancher beta API. I can also link to that later on. And what it does is like actually we build it to do everything that we need for a deploy. So first of all, it will take a look, like, is the environment you want to deploy there already there? If not, create it. Does it have hosts? If not, add hosts, like via the Docker machine driver. We're on GCE, by the way. Then create secrets if you need to create secrets, which we can finally now do because we now been using like Rancher 1.6 since like a week. And then it will deploy stacks. And what it's also supposed to do is deploy whole QA environments, because that's like kind of the holy grail that we've been running after for the last couple of months. So of course, right now we have a production and integration environment, which is nice, but like what we really want to have is that one of our QA guys or anyone basically can just say, here, please deploy our complete stack with this version of this component inside it. And then it should create it like a complete new environment, add hosts, everything, seed, and then supply a URL for the person who ever initiated the process to test it, or just run some automated integration tests and then basically just merge it and deploy to master. And another component that we have is called Magic Mike. It's basically a script that runs on one of our hosts, which pulls the Rancher API and sees what hosts are available, like what hosts are available and which environment they are. And then it will create an HA proxy with this information and do SSL termination and the domain mapping. So we had to write this because like none of the solutions that we have for GCE kind of fit for us. I think Rancher has something available if you are working on AWS, but for GCE we had to write something. It's like a really simple script. We also want to open source this as well as Shire. There's already one version available, but we've been like doing a lot of work in the last couple of months, so stay tuned. We want to open source it as soon as possible. So, okay, you still here? So,
looks good.
okay, thank you. So let's look at our deploy workflow. There's obviously like a lot to unpack here. So basically what we do is if I push to a branch, it will trigger running our linting and test stages in our GitLab CI pipeline. And it will also build a Docker image. It will push this Docker image to our GitLab Docker registry. And in like a stage after the image has been built, it will also run a GitLab Docker runner with the Shire Docker image to deploy the software. And if you know a bit about, so like one thing that I might need to explain here is that in GitLab Docker Runner, you can choose the Docker image that you'll use for this stage. And what basically happens is that, for example, if I use Shire, I have like my Shire Docker image, and the code gets mounted into like, I think, /app. So basically, I have like a Docker image with Shire installed in it, and I also have the source code or like whatever the code that I have in my repository available. And since we store some information for Shire in our repositories regarding the deployment, we could just deploy it from there. The information that we actually use is just the Docker and Rancher compose that we get from Rancher. And that's what Shire is using. So Shire then upserts a new environment. If it's not already there, it will create a host, as I told you, and it will deploy the stack. And then we have our new version of our stack running in Rancher. And at that point, Magic Mike will poll continuously the Rancher API and make whatever has been exposed here available to our users and QA guys and Jenkins. And in our current workflow, it's like that we deploy either to an integration environment or like sometimes we create new environments. The QA guys will look at that and then merge it, and then the whole cycle starts again with a master branch, and this will end up actually deploying our master branch to our production instance. Okay, so that's like the basic deploy workflow that we have running right now. What we're working on right now is to extend this. We still needed some like parts that are now available in Rancher. Like one of the main parts is the secrets management that we've been waiting for in Rancher, and it works pretty much the same. There's like a couple of differences in the workflow. So what we do is like I still push to a branch. But as you see, like in my branch name, I have an @ and like this is like one of our ticket numbers. But basically, this is then used to generate a new environment. So if I do this, for example, I want this version of code that I'm working on to be deployed to an environment that will be named like Steel 327. Okay, so what basically happens is the CI and build pipelines will run, will push the image to the Docker registry, and at that point Shire will take over, and here we are not using like the deploy command but like the deploy all command. And the difference here is that it will not just deploy this one, like not from only this project, but it will deploy our whole stack. And to deploy this whole stack, what we need to do is that we need to have this information, what is our whole stack, somewhere. This is currently baked into Shire, so we have like a stack YAML in Shire. I can show you afterwards. And this basically holds the information like which groups and projects from our GitLab instance, it should deploy to a new environment. So we'll take a look at that. We'll deploy all of these items from the, all of these stacks actually from the stack YAML into our new environment that has been upserted with master branch, which is basically the latest image. And it will deploy the project that we've been pushing here too with the actual commit that we've pushed here. So this gives us then a QA environment with, like, say, 21 of our services being master and like the one change that we actually want to test with the commit that we actually want to test. Nice thing about this convention with the add that we have here is that we can let Shia handle which environment it should push to. And also, like, what we need to think about all the time is how do we handle like multi-project, multi-group, microservice deployments. So using this add convention, we can also go to another project and also put the add in there, and then it will get deployed to the same QA environment. The idea is that, of course, like, we might have changes that are in the front end and in some of the services of the back end. So we want to deploy all of these changes into one QA environment, then test it, and then like tear down the environment again. And yeah, that's basically what we've been working on. I can tell you that the secret stuff is something that we are implementing right now, and the rest is actually working apart from these integration tests. So we still need to seed data in our QA environments, and we still need to run, like, currently we're still running the integration test from the outside with Jenkins, because our QA guys love Qtest and Jenkins. But in the future, we want to also run them, like deploy them as one container in our Rancher environment and let them run from within the Rancher environment, and then trigger a merge, like to have the fully automated setup, no more manual QAing, so that like after a successful run, the merge request gets merged directly, and this will then trigger the deploy again, which will deploy directly to master. So that's kind of the workflow that we've created right now. There are some links. So you can take a look at our GitLab Klöckner I repository or group. We currently only have one open project here, which is the Rancher API beta gem. So it uses the V2 beta API. There's like a very good version, which this gem is also based off, in GitHub, which uses the V1 API, and we extended this a bit. So basically, it supports the complete API. So we are using the schema for like the complete API schema that the Rancher API provides to generate the code for this API gem. So it supports like the complete Rancher API, and it's also very easy to update. So this will be updated as we go. And we also want to, as I already told you, want to open source Shia and Magic Mike soonish. So if you take a look at our GitHub repository for Klöckner I, you will find Shia, like a version that we've published like 8 months ago, which basically already holds like most of the ideas and hasn't changed like that much apart from like some secrets and volume management stuff. So if you want to take a look, and it's open source, you can use it, yeah. So if you want to take a look, that's a good place to start. I also included links to slides that I did at LinuxCon last year. So you can also take a look at these slides. Also explains what we're doing there. There are also some videos and demos on how I'm actually using it. And if you have any questions, you can really just ask me. I might want to show you, because this might pop up as a question, like 2 things. First of all, this Shire folder here. So this is like one of the projects that we have in GitLab that we want to deploy. And it basically just has this Shire folder here with the folder compose in it, with the Docker compose and Rancher compose file, which you can copy directly from Rancher, more or less. And it also has like a config YAML inside with the group name and project name in GitLab. And we have like Shire, and this includes, it's still in the repository, it needs to be handled a bit differently if we open source it. So it has these two files. One is the stacks YAML, so these are all the stacks that we deploy to a new QA environment, and also like the machine template for our GCE machines that we create. Yeah. And that's more or less what we have right now. So I'm open to questions. I could also demo something.
That was great. Yeah, that was great, Nick. Very, very good demo. There's a couple of questions that have come in, about different elements of GitLab and some of the stuff we've been showing. One question Timur asked at the beginning. You talked about achieving high availability with your Rancher deployment. He was just Timur said, how exactly do you achieve high availability? Rancher provides a load balancer, but the IP is still sort of a point of failure. Anything you want to talk about there in terms of how you've been deploying HA apps using Rancher?
You mean how do we deploy the apps, or how do we achieve the Rancher high availability?
Sorry, I think he's asking how do you achieve Rancher itself is high availability.
Okay, so Rancher itself is high available. We have like the 3 hosts that we have running. We have like the databases, external database, which is also mirrored. We have our files stored on NFS. So we basically use the NFS Rancher volume driver. And and we have a load balancer in front of all our public access points, actually. So, and we are running multiple containers of critical services on multiple hosts. So like for our production environment, we currently have, I think, 4 hosts up, and we try to schedule the containers in a way that they are distributed over multiple hosts. And then HA proxy would handle failure if one of the hosts would go down.
Got it. There's a question that Slavomir asked a little bit ago, and he was saying, assume I have 30 apps with separate GitLab CI files with many stages. Is there a common way to externalize and centralize stage configurations? I mean, parts of the pipeline YAML file content. Because now when STH changes, looks like I have to manually update 30 files. When stage changes, looks like I have to manually update 30 files. Is there a common way to do that you're aware of?
We also have that problem. I would say my main, like what we've been doing kind of is we always come back to create a tool with simple commands that don't change, and then build a Docker image out of it and use this in a stage. So if you have, for example, like a Docker image like Shire, for example, and just has the deploy command, if you change the deploy command in Shire, you don't have to change all the GitLab YAML files. It will still be the same command there, but you have like changes in the tool. So for example, if you look at Shire in our GitLab, it also has 2 stages. It also runs some tests, and then it will build and publish a new version of itself. And as soon as we push and somebody merges our merge request, our whole setup in GitLab will use this new version of Shire, and we don't have to change anything in the GitLab CI files. So I think this is also kind of what Adrian has been showing, like using the CDRX tool, and that would be probably the way that I would go for in GitLab. So basically do everything with Docker.
Awesome. Another question was, Dimitri asked, is it possible to integrate GitLab with Jira? And what about the case if we're going to compose a set of tasks in Jira to release image with an assigned version under server instead of commit hash, I think is what that is. I don't know if that's a good question for you or maybe for Adrian, but I'll kind of throw it to you to start with, Nick.
Yeah, we've been playing a bit about around with the GitLab and Jira implementation. We also use Jira, and you can do something like give a merge request or like do a commit and say something like close this issue, blah blah blah, and this works sometimes. But right now we're still doing it by hand. So basically, it's like also not like we don't move like millions of tickets each sprint. We move maybe like 50 or something. So it wouldn't save us that much time, and we haven't had the problem of losing track of what we've been moving through our Scrum process. So it's possible, but I haven't set it up like working.
Another question, Adrian, this might be a question for you. Espen asked if there's an overview or status page in GitLab to show all project status or filter the ones you want. Do you want to kind of comment on that?
I don't understand the question.
He's asking if there was an overview or status page to show all the project statuses or filter the ones you want. I don't know. Maybe I can ask him to clarify.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
I think there's nothing like this right now because my feeling is that GitLab is not yet like completely built to have this kind of multi-project or like microservice architecture kind of thing where you like have like one big status board somewhere. Like for example, we internally still use Prometheus and Grafana to display like metrics that we collect in Rancher, using the Prometheus GitLab community, Rancher community node. But Adrian, I don't know.
Roy, one of the just mentioned there is an integration with Jira out there with GitLab that they use, and I don't know if there's a link or anything you want to share, Roy, but I'll just pass along your note here as well. This may be a good question for you, Adrian. Ganesan asks, he said, for downloading Docker images, we configure credentials in Rancher registry. Which I'm assuming mean Docker registry here. How does the Rancher host use those credentials to download the Docker images? I.e., with respect to security, would the master server pass on the credentials to the host and get stored somewhere in the host, or is it used on the fly only when downloading the image? And so I think the question is sort of about secret management in Rancher possibly, but do you want to talk a little bit about that question, maybe, Adrian?
Yeah, I was actually just looking at that one when you started talking about it. If you're asking about if the question is about Rancher's registry, Rancher has the ability to log into any Docker registry, whether that's Docker Hub, Quay, Artifactory, GitLab CI, anything at all, and then that's just used. It performs a Docker login and is used to pull the images down for deployment. I'm reading the second half of the question now. Credentials to the host can store somewhere in the host. Rancher. I'll talk about Rancher secrets, even though I'm not sure that's. Hang on, there's a third part here. Credentials, plain text under admin settings page. Best for credentials set plain text. Yeah, I'll talk about Rancher secrets, though I don't think that's what this is covering. Rancher also has a secrets functionality where you can assign a secret in the UI, and it's stored encrypted in the database, and then you can map that secret through to a container. So a example use case is you don't want your database password in an environment variable, or God forbid, stored in your actual source code repository in your config file. So you create a secret inside of Rancher called database password, and then when you deploy the service, you designate that you want that secret mounted securely inside the container as a file called database password. Then your container initialization process reads the contents of that file, and it's created on a read-only tempfs file system, and it's done securely. And then your container can use the contents when it's actually doing its initialization.
So I think Ganesh just said he's not really asking about secrets, but more about credentials that are required to download the Docker images from the registry. So can you have more granular, maybe, other than simply, if you have credentials to download a specific image from the registry, is there a way to sort of enforce those within Rancher? I think would be maybe the question.
I'm not clear on how to answer that. I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
That's
Maybe
okay.
I can tell how we did it. So, for example, I mean, we use the GitLab Docker registry. So if you look at one of our projects here, you'll see that we have like the registry tab here. And within Rancher, we actually have like our Docker registry configured with the user, and this user is used to download all the Docker containers from our Docker registry. You could theoretically, I don't know if you can add multiple users, but for example, this user has access to all the containers that it needs to have access to. So I don't know, maybe, I think like the question is more like how the actual, like, if I store this here within Rancher, it's stored in the database, and I think the question maybe goes into the direction like how does like the credentials here, how do they get passed from the database to the actual kettle host that will download the image?
Well, I can tell you that the actual Rancher nodes communicate back with the server over HTTPS. So the passing of information is done in an encrypted fashion. There's no way to intercept that along the way. And then everything beyond that behaves, I mean, just the same way it does if you would do Docker login. I just don't think that they're cached or saved anywhere locally on the system. I follow the same pattern that you have here. I use a deploy user who has reporter status inside of GitLab, and that just gives them the ability to pull images, but it doesn't actually give them any ability to interact with the repository.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that answered the question, guys. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I know we've been going for a while. We're coming up on 2 hours, so I think we're gonna wrap up now. We'll try to answer the rest of the questions in the chat. A number of them are about GitLab capabilities that are probably better questions for Mark, who unfortunately had to take off. So we'll do our best to answer them, and if we can't, we'll respond to kind of through an email if we can afterwards. Otherwise, thank you, Nick, for sharing that. That was great. Just to kind of wrap us up, just kind of typically. We'll kind of go through this. One second, let me jump up to sort of my last slide or two. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
All right. So just a quick update on the latest release of Rancher. Rancher 1.6 came out a few weeks ago. I've got the wrong date on here. It's not March 3rd. It was end of May. And the main features that came out in 1.6 are the introduction of catalogs per environment. It's all in the API now. The HA proxy support for loading SSL search data volume. The support for secrets in Compose. And we GA'd all the Rancher EBS stuff. So we won't go into too much of those in detail, but you can find it all on GitHub under the release notes. In terms of right now, 1.6 is going to be kind of a long-term release vehicle for us on the 1.6 platform. Rancher's gotten so many people running it in production. Our new plan is to as we kind of run down the end of the 1.0 train, is we'll leave 1.6 as a vehicle for people that want to run kind of the same deployment for a long time in production. We'll be porting any security fixes or significant bug fixes back to 1.6, and pretty soon we're going to be rolling out 2.0. So if you keep your eyes on the Git repo, you'll see 2.0 alphas and stuff will start to come out over the next few weeks. So this summer you'll see a 2.0 alpha pretty quickly, and then we'll sometime over the course of the summer that will become stable. There's a lot of new features and changes going into 2.0. So 1.6 is great if you want to upgrade. It's definitely when you should start pushing to get in place. And it will be pretty much a stable release for some time. It'll be the one that we sort of just are pushing a lot of fixes to for the next year. If you haven't already, get your, download Rancher, download GitLab. All these tools that are open source are really there for you to get your hands on and start consuming. You can find everything under our GitHub page. To get started, Rancher can be deployed as a single container. It's very easy to get going. If you haven't tried it already, you can also go to try.rancher.com where you can get a free account, get a free deployment to use and run yourself. You don't have to worry about the management server, just get experience with deploying environments and talking to the API. It's not a production grade thing. It's just meant for people who want to use the platform for testing and for evaluating and trying to kind of get a hands-on experience without having to go deploy it themselves. Finally, there was a couple of questions on the Slack or in the chat while we were going about training classes. We run a monthly training every month on Rancher. We're going to be repeating the Kubernetes training we did last month pretty regularly now. So you'll see, you can sign up at any given time to go through a 1 to 2 hour long hands-on introduction to using, deploying, and managing Rancher Kubernetes environments. You can get your hands do that at any time. Just go to rancher.com/training and you'll see what's out there and can sign yourself up for those. And with that, I'd love to thank Mark, Nick, and Adrian for their presentations today, as all of you for attending. As always, we'll be sending out recording and access to the slides, as well as information about next month's meetup. If you're interested in presenting or have some topics you think would be helpful, feel free to email me at shannon@rancher.com, and I would certainly love to have you come and share your story, share some cool thing that you're doing. Otherwise, with that, I will thank you all and hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.